The end. Could you hear the words? Okay, good. Well, there you have the moral of the story. Don't be like the Pharisee. Be like the publican or the tax collector, right? Pretty simple. Except the Pharisee was right. I mean, he said he wasn't like other people. He was not like other people. He tried very hard to live a moral life. He said, you know, I don't cheat, and I'm not an adulterer, and I worship God, and you know, all those things were true. But his issue was that he began to say, you know, I've been successful as a person because of all the things that I've done. And when you do that in the temple, there's a bit of a problem. Because, you know, as Jesus reminds us, God looks at things in some little different ways. We don't use the word righteous much. I mean, I don't ever hear that word. But we might use the word successful, you know, because the Pharisee was successful as a follower of the law of Israel. You know, he did a double tithe, and he fasted more than he had to, and he went to the temple, and so on like that. So he was successful. And, you know, we don't say righteous, but maybe if you're a good employee, you hope that your boss would say that you were righteous or successful. Or, you know, if you were a person that had a number of friends, you would say maybe you were socially successful. If you were good at something, music or art or video gaming or whatever, you know, there's something you're successful about. But success always has to be a matter of comparison. You know, because yesterday there was a lot of football played. Yay! And half the teams won, and half the teams lost. And then we have the top 10, and they look at how those teams did, and they're all in comparison with how they did versus other teams. So you say, okay, you know, Ohio State or Alabama or LSU is number one, but it's only in comparison of the other teams. And the Pharisee was thinking about how good a person he was, but he couldn't help but look over at the tax collector who was, you know, working for the Roman government and taking money from people that they resented so the Romans could occupy their land. You know, everybody hated him. I mean, he had one use, and that was everybody could look down on him. But, you know, he couldn't help but comparing himself to that nasty tax collector. And it's just kind of human nature. How do we do it? It's like, well, we feel good if we think we're better than somebody else, right? But, you know, success has a price in that you're never entirely successful, and you're never quite good enough. There's always somebody better. Now, there may be somebody worse than you, but there's always somebody better. There's a young woman whose name popped up in my life this week. Her name is Asina O'Neill. And she is an Australian, and I think she's about 21 or 2 now. And when she was 18, she had a huge media following. She had 500,000 followers on Instagram, and she had 200,000 followers on YouTube and some other social media platforms, which was producing income for her. But she came to a revelation is that this is all phony. And I seen her picture. I mean, you would say she's gorgeous, but she said, you know, it's all makeup and retouching and so on. And these people, you know, they think they have relationships with me because I put stuff on social media platforms, but it's all just two-dimensional. And she said, without realizing it, I serve no real purpose other than self-promotion. I've spent the majority of my teenage life being addicted to social media, social approval, social status, and my physical appearance. It's not real. It's contrived images and edited clips ranked against each other. It's a system based on social approval, likes, validation of views, success and followers. It's perfectly orchestrated, self-absorbed judgment. I was consumed by it. Pretty wise to kind of come to that realization as an 18-year-old that was successful in this. And, you know, she's moved on with her life. But, you know, if any of us would be so successful, do you think we'd run with that? Tempting. You know it's funny, but it's putting money in your pocket. I don't know. So she looked around and she saw, you know, there's no point in this because it's just all about being better than somebody else. The Pharisee was quite proud of himself, and he had worked to work on the outside of things. But the problem that Jesus points out in the parable is it's not about the outside, it's about the inside. And the tax collector, who was a scourge of the community, came and he sat at the back of the church because he didn't want anybody to notice him. And all he said was, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And then Jesus says, which of these went away justified? And the disciples would scratch their head and wonder, what did he mean by that? Because he didn't explain. He didn't say, well, what happened to the Pharisee after that? Or what happened to the tax collector? You know, did he clean up his act and pay back people he'd overcharged? We just don't know. But that day, he went away justified. And justified means that we get our life right with God. That we're healthy with God. That what we are and who we are is consistent with God wanting us to be this. So, the whole idea of this parable is that, you know, you can try, but you can't do it on your own. It's a matter of accepting God's mercy for your life. If you have been a parent or an aunt, or you know children can be selfish and mean and do things that are pretty despicable. But do we give up our love for them? No. And if we as human parents can do that, how much more could God, as our Heavenly Father, continue to love us no matter what we do and want to be in relationship with us? Which is kind of the whole point of all of this. The secret of being a Christian, or maybe just being a decent person, is realizing that you're always in need. That you just cannot fix yourself. You can do a lot of things that are right for yourself, but you can't ultimately fix yourself. Growing up, like many of you, I was taught about sin. Sin is a bad thing. The Ten Commandments teach us about sin. The Sermon on the Mount teaches about sin. There's the 7 deadly sins. The golden rule. And then I got older and I realized that failure to act when you know something bad is happening and you can help that and you don't do anything, that's a sin too. It gets complicated. But that only really scratches the surface. It's a partial definition. Sin is a refusal to become fully human. It's saying, you know, I'm kind of okay. And I know creation is evolving, but I'm not going to have any part of that. I'm kind of set in my ways, and I don't want God speaking to me. I don't want any of this Holy Spirit stuff in my life. I just kind of leave me alone. It's kind of the opposite of creativity. It's the opposite of abundance, opposite of coherence. It's kind of like a walking death when you are just so wrapped up in your life that you don't need anything else. And our relationship with God never works that way. Richard Rohr is a favorite of some of you, maybe. He's a really interesting writer. He said, it's not addition that makes one holy, but subtraction. Stripping the illusions, letting go of pretense, exposing the false self, breaking open the heart, not taking my private life too seriously. We flourish when we kind of are willing to strip away all the things that get in the way, the things that are on the outside, the things that kind of build our ego and our pride and so on like that. And you know, the problem with those things, it's good to have self-confidence, but they just kind of make a barrier for anything getting through, including God. We cannot earn God's mercy. It can only be received. The two men went up to the temple, and one protected himself, kind of trained. The other one was open and surrendered and weeps. And God hears both prayers. And maybe God says, well, you know, the Pharisee is doing a lot of things right. And maybe the tax collector is not doing a lot of things right. But because of their attitudes, only one of them went away justified. And the crazy thing about Jesus' parables is they just kind of turn things on their head. And he says, it's the tax collector that was just. It's the tax collector that had the right relationship with God. We don't know what he did with that. But that's the story. And maybe the responsibility of us as Christians, and we want to encourage that we try hard to live a moral life, but that we make room for mercy in our lives. You know, let people love you. Let God love you. Open yourself to receiving blessings from God. You know, some people that's in the form of stuff, but you know, blessings is relationships. It's the thing that gives you meaning in life. I'm going to stop there. I mean, the point is hopefully one that we can internalize and take home. This morning, in the earlier service, I shared something before we talked about taking the offering. And that is, the only thing that is really yours, really, really yours, is what you give away. We have been given, and hopefully you feel like that God has blessed your life. But what you take out of this life is not stuff, you know. They were saying, I've never seen a hearse pulling a trailer. What we take out is what we've given away. Ourselves, our love, our concern, our time, and what we have in terms of financial resources. Because we control it and we chose to give it to somebody else. And that really